Have you ever had a situation that was going to lead to a confrontation, a conversation that you didn't want to have? Uncomfortable conversations, difficult situations, messes that you don't know what to do with or how to fix. That is the topic of today's episode of Leading in the Gospel. I'm Cary. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Leading in the Gospel. I'm sitting here in this virtual studio with my friend Kurt Skelly. Kurt, welcome back.
Always good to be here.
We began this conversation in our last podcast. We're calling it Gospel-Shaped Confrontation. It is the pastor's job or the job of spiritual leaders, and I think it's really a team effort. I teach all of our pastoral staff and our deacon team that this is our responsibility to have, not to be looking for them, but when they arise, to have difficult conversations. And yet, for some pastors, this is just the last thing they want to do. We procrastinate, we put it off, and then we don't know what to do in these situations. And so we're trying to really break down, and Kurt's doing a masterful job of just giving us a great approach to how to have difficult conversations. Now, before we jump into that, I want to remind you to mark your calendar for September 28th through October the 1st. This is our 8th year of hosting Leading in the Gospel Refuel. We host this retreat for pastors and their wives every year at Disney World. This year, we're contracted to stay at the Grand Floridian Resort right outside the Magic Kingdom. This is, again, our 8th year. It's a time of refreshment, renewal, friendship building, mentoring, edification. We spend the mornings, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning, being mentored and encouraged through teaching sessions, our husbands and wives, men and women, and then together. We spend then the afternoons in conversations and fellowship, walking and enjoying the parks and the resorts and having meals together. It is a wonderful, life-giving, memorable time. And the good news this year is if you have never attended and you would like to be a part of Leading in the Gospel Refuel, we have a generous gift that is allowing us to provide partial sponsorships. And so you can email me, pastor@ebcnewington.com, to learn more about those sponsorships or to apply for one of those sponsorships. And I'll be giving you more information about that in the coming weeks and months. You can find out more about this at inthegospel.com. Inthegospel.com, also books and resources are available there that we hope you will use in your church and local ministry. All right, so Kurt, we set it up. There's 3 pieces to this conversation. The first one was in our last episode, preparing your heart before the confrontation or the difficult conversation. I'm going to read the 9 things that we talked about very quickly. Count to 10. Number 2, don't count to 20. Number 3, look inward, do some self-examination. Number 4, consider letting it go. Is this a thing that can be just deferred? Number 5, refuse to ambush. Don't surprise attack someone. Number 6, inform others on a need-to-know basis. In other words, don't talk this out just to build a quorum or team of people on your side, but also don't withhold information from those that need to know. Number 7, refuse to assign or pre-assign motives. I think it's important to add there on that point, Kurt, those motives sometimes become clear in the conversation. And I've had those conversations go where the person was kind of discovering their own motives during the conversation. So don't assign motives. Recognize your natural bias. That was number 8. And number 9, genuinely pray about the situation and about the person. So now we want to move into the actual conversation, conducting the appointment where you're going to have this difficult conversation. So talk us through it.
Yeah, so this is the people pleaser's worst day. You know, for years, you talked about it last episode, just the angst of having uncomfortable meetings, and it's just so hard. And I read that book years ago by Lou Priolo called Pleasing People. The subtitle of that book is How Not to Be an Approval Junkie. And what a subtitle. But, there at the beginning of that book, there's that assessment tool And I took it and I failed abysmally. I am a people pleaser. And so I want to say things that to make people like me. And I don't want to tell anybody bad news. I want to be the guy on Reader's Digest that gives the $14 million cardboard check. So these conversations are difficult, but Lord willing, after having gone through some of these pre-conversation suggestions and thinking through, praying through, being motivated ourselves by a genuine love for the person with whom we're having the conversation, being motivated by a genuine sense of responsibility and stewardship before the Lord, to have the conversation. I think all of that is going to help. It doesn't mean, though, that in the conversation itself, there isn't going to be a measure of butterflies in one's stomach. Just, you don't have to feel good about doing what's right. You just have to do what's right. So here we are. We're in the coffee shop. We're at the office or wherever we've decided to have this meeting, and we're having the meeting itself. What do we do? I would say this. First of all, keep the meeting appropriately private. So important. And I think the word you used last episode was the word respectful, that we need to just respect other people's privacy. How often have we had conversations that are unnecessarily uncomfortable because we're speaking in an office that has paper-thin walls? Or we've asked people to come down a hallway where they have to kind of walk the gauntlet of people wondering, well, what's that couple doing here? So find a way to be able to have an appropriately private meeting.
I think that respecting that privacy, I think it needs to be contrasted against, there are many such meetings where I have had a person in the meeting with me, never to a surprise of the person we're meeting with. I always say, I'm going to have another pastor or my wife or a deacon or whatever. I let them know someone's going to be there. But I'm sure you would identify with this. I've been in meetings enough where they've been twisted, they've been spun, I've been misquoted or misrepresented. Where if the confrontation is of this nature, where it could go south in terms of the kind of confrontation it is, or the way it's the story that's told afterwards, I have someone sitting in there, and I sometimes tell them, listen, I don't want you to say anything. I just want you to write furiously. I said, you can be writing a note to your grandmother for all I care, but I just want it to be like you're taking notes of everything that's being said. And usually it's not that. Usually there are notes being taken, or usually the other person is contributing to the conversation. But appropriately private doesn't always mean you're alone. It might mean that there's someone in there listening as a witness or as a contributor to help to moderate in the meeting. I also feel like, Kurt, and this is maybe just personal to me, if I have someone sitting there with me, I'm better able to moderate my own emotions. I don't know what that is, but having a companion helping to cultivate the conversation helps me kind of keep my own heart in the right space.
And it gives you good feedback when the meeting's over. It gives you good feedback as well, because you're going to ask that person, was I overboard? Did I handle myself? And they're going to give you good feedback as well.
Yeah. Okay. Lead us into number 11.
Okay. So number 11, ask questions. And when I say number 11, this is all based upon the 9 we did last episode. Right. So number 10, keep the meeting private. But number 11, ask questions instead of making accusations. And this is just a really good life lesson for all conversation. Is we are, sometimes we feel as if we're in a meeting because we have prayed, because we have researched, because we're coming in locked and loaded, that we feel like we have to now be judge, jury, and executioner all in the same moment, and resist that urge. You really, even if you feel like motives, and the why, and all the what, and you have all the evidence, it's still important to ask questions. Think about it. This was what the Lord does with us. When the Lord was looking for Adam, quote unquote, where art thou, Adam? Or Jesus saying to Peter, do you love me? It's not that God didn't know where Adam was, or that Jesus didn't know that Peter loved him. No, of course they did. But asking the question does something to the listener. It forces them to look inward. It forces introspection on their part. It makes it more of a self-discovery than an accusation, an imposed accusation upon them.
I had a man one time say to me, Pastor, I'm going to give you a magic question. He was a successful businessman. And I said, great, magic question. What is it? He said, when you're in a meeting and there's tension, or it's confrontational, or someone seems to be emotional, he said, just pause and catch your breath and say, help me understand, what is your greatest concern? Now, that may not always be the right question to ask in these kinds of meetings that we're talking about. But he was 1,000% right when he said it's a magic question. And I mean, you've heard the statement, accusations harden the will, but questions stimulate the conscience. And in the moment, if I can remember to calm my heart, my emotions, and simply seek to understand, ask questions, I typically see that the person arrives at their own conclusions that I wanted them to arrive at just because of asking the right questions. The conversation goes so much better.
And I'll say this too, Cary, and that is, study Jesus' ministry. 307 times in the Gospels, Jesus is asking a question. So when we have conversations that are give and take, asking questions, really what we're doing is we're reviving a biblical way of dealing with situations. You really are. And it's not even only a biblical way. That was the way, that Socratic style of bringing people to self-discovery. Remember when they discovered Jesus in the temple at age 12, he was both asking and receiving questions. Often he would stimulate even thoughts about a certain subject. Hey, what do you think about this? A certain man had 2 sons, and he would often do that. And I think if we kind of inculcate that culture into our conversations, it really does open people up in ways that they would not otherwise be open.
Yeah, very powerful. Okay, number 12.
Okay, so number 12, and this is very similar to number 11, it may be even saying it in a different way. Seek to understand more than to be understood. This is hard for me. I'm a debater by nature. I think I know. I want people to understand what I'm telling them. I want them to understand my directive. And it's much more important in a conversation to try to understand where they're coming from. Now their thinking may be faulty. They might have some poor rationale, but at least and you just said this with that important question that man suggested you give. Help me to understand. That's what you're saying. Help me to understand, where you're coming from. I read a book some time ago. I don't know if it was The Question Behind the Question. It may have been that book, but basically what the author said was this: when a person has spoken, let them speak. Don't interrupt, because they maybe aren't a trained communicator. Maybe they're grasping. Just be quiet. You'll have your chance. Let them speak. And then when they're done saying what they're going to say, some it'll take 5 minutes. Some will say it in 2 sentences. But when they're done, ask this question: is there anything else? And then let them speak. And when they're finished, look at them and say to them again, and is there anything else? And continue to ask them until they say, no, I think that's it. And then you can begin to ask follow-up questions or begin to state your side of it.
Yeah, that would be on the list of magic questions. Is there anything else? And letting someone just say what they need to say. You say in number 13, repeat their position for clarity. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, so sometimes we're just talking at each other. And especially is this true with somebody that maybe is not a trained communicator, is you think you are you think that you're explaining yourself well, but Johnny hasn't learned if teacher hasn't taught, or rather teacher hasn't taught if Johnny hasn't learned. And many times in conversation, what you think they understand, they don't understand. And conversely, what you think you're understanding that they said is not really what they meant or what they said. And a magic way to ascertain that is simply when they finish what they're going to say, recap it and say it back to them. So, sir, ma'am, okay, what I hear you saying is this. You said this and there and that and him and this statement, and that's the reason you feel this way. Am I understanding this correctly? And it's interesting, Cary, because when you do that habitually, what you'll find is often people will say things like, oh, well, no, that's not what I meant. Well, I didn't really. Right. And you're actually helping them. You're shaping their emotions about it just by restating what they said.
Right. Yeah, you're forcing them to come to terms with what is really going on here. And I've had conversations that the more we got into it, the more the person was like, yeah, I guess this was just emotion. I guess I wasn't right. There's not really a problem here. It was just my emotion.
Right.
That actually happens to me probably half the time when I'm asking,
it does.
Tell me what you're most concerned about, So I don't want to give any specifics because I don't want to betray a confidence of somebody that might listen to the podcast and go, well, he told my story. There's so many times that a person, though, says at the end of the conversation, goes, yeah, I guess I was just emotional in the moment. And it's not really as substantive as I thought it was.
It's the magic of saying things. It's the magic of saying things out loud. So when you make people, when you listen, then obviously that invites them to speak. And when they speak and say things out loud, what you're going to begin to find is that as you're giving them space, anything else? When you're doing that with people and they say things out loud, they'll also begin to counsel themselves. So they'll say things like, yeah, and they said this and I said that, and I probably shouldn't have said it that way. And, looking back, maybe I could have. They're giving themselves counsel. Because you're just allowing them to speak.
Yeah. And I think behind the scenes, you're allowing the Holy Spirit to do the deeper work. You're facilitating the conversation, but you're not playing the part of God. God is, this comes back to where we started: gentleness, meekness, instructing those that oppose themselves, that God peradventure. So it's a beautiful thing. So you say, number 14, guard your tone and facial expressions. Now, Kurt, before you explain that one, my trouble with that is I can't see my face. So
yeah, but I think
coach us on this.
You probably, well, ask the person in the room that's in the room with you. Hey, what were my facial expressions? I'm horrible at this. I give away by my tone, I just get passionate. I'll roll my eyes. I'm trying to do better with this. How often have you been in and this is really the strength of having marital counseling. And so here you are in this meeting with this married couple, and they neither one of them ever allows the other one to have a full sentence when they're arguing about this in private. But now they're in front of the pastor. So each one of them has to show at least a modicum of deference. So now all of a sudden they are listening, and you're even coaching them, saying, no, listen, you're going to have your turn. Okay, just listen. And what happens is they're listening, but they're still communicating because they're rolling their eyes or, pointing their feet away. And what I'm saying is we have to listen non-verbally and give the overture of rapt attention by not showing doubt with our grimace or our furrowed forehead or our rolling of the eyes or the tone. Sarcasm does not work in counseling. So I tend to be sarcastic by nature. I feel like it's a spiritual gift, but not good, not good in counseling.
Yeah, I find myself getting this same as you said, probably worse than you, emotionally invested, passionate, and probably that emotion comes out of me more. That's why having a person there sometimes as a witness helps me. Or doing this front work where I'm coming in very focused and very calm and very dependent on the Lord, just cognitively, it helps to put my emotions in the right place. But guarding your tone. Proverbs 15:1 is the verse you gave. A soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. Number 15, you said, be predisposed to forgive. And I love this point, but I'll let you unfold it.
So let me just go back to that last point, one last statement, and that is, when it comes to tone, if the conversation begins to escalate, and it often will, it's impossible to escalate if both don't contribute. So remember that in a conversation, it's impossible to emotionally escalate if both people don't contribute. So don't match their volume. Don't match their tone. Don't match their cadence. So what I would say is, Proverbs 15, going back to that verse, is let there be a pause. If a person's getting angry, just just pause. And then get softer. And then get slower. And sometimes what you have to say to people is, hey, listen, I can see that you are really worked up about this. And maybe we just need to defer this conversation to a time when you can get your emotions under control and we can talk about this. So honestly, it just getting slower, getting softer, and using pauses, I think, are great applications to that verse in Proverbs.
Yeah.
But anyway, I want to say that because it's really easy for type A people to just devolve into argumentation and matching tone, matching cadence, and you're accomplishing nothing at that point. I would say be predisposed to forgive. Sometimes our predisposition in a conversation is to win the argument, to make our case, to impose judgment. And while some of those things may be necessary, you might have to make the argument. You might have to impose a verdict. That's part of our positional responsibility. I think personally, we need to be predisposed to a restorative relationship with a restored relationship with this person. And predisposition, so the way I understand forgiveness is this. Forgiveness really cannot be activated unless there is the condition of the will to say, I repent, I'm sorry, but there can be a predisposition to forgiveness. So is a person who has never received Jesus Christ, does he stand forgiven at the judgment day? Of course not. He's not. Could he have been forgiven? Yes. Was God predisposed to forgive him? Absolutely. And that's Ephesians 4. Be ye kind, tender-hearted, forgiving one another. So a predisposition so that I'm ready, willing, and able when a person demonstrates true repentance to have this relationship restored in forgiveness. I think sometimes that's a matter of our own heart, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I would say don't have the conversation if you're not already in a spirit of forgiveness. I mean, it's like Ephesians 4, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. I mean, we have to start there, or we're not ready to have the conversation. So predisposed to forgive.
Yeah,
16,
and forgiveness doesn't
said,
mean that we're not going to. And forgiveness does not mean that we're not going to be part of the consequences for the action. They can both be true. That
Right.
forgiveness doesn't mean it's okay. You're not going to receive any consequences. That's not it at all. You might have to fire that staff member, but you can still forgive, and they can.
Yeah.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, forgiveness doesn't mean you trust them. It doesn't mean that there's no consequences. It doesn't mean that the conversation or the outcomes will go differently. It just is the right place to start. Under number 16, you said, adopt a spirit of humility. So take a minute and unpack that. I think we talked about it too as well from the opening 2 Timothy verse.
Yeah, we did, and this honestly is something we enter the conversation with a spirit of humility. But it's important in the conversation itself to keep that spirit of humility, to understand, what if this were my, and a good way to do that is to role play, to remember that we very easily could have made the same dumb decision. I think that's what the Bible speaks about in Galatians 6 when it says we consider ourselves. We consider ourselves. Wherefore let him that thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. So we have to be careful. And I think another great way to keep oneself humble is view the person on the other side of the conversation as a family member. View them like, what if this were my son, my wife, my daughter, my sister, who was facing this? How would I want a counselor to? And humility is a magnet. Humility attracts, and when we, and humility is a correct estimation of oneself. It's not to think less of yourself, but it's really to think of yourself less and to say, Lord, I for whatever reason, you've allowed me to have this position. You've allowed me to be the pastor. And Lord, I'm not better than other people. I'm not inherently stronger than other people. So help me to have a requisite humility. And Lord, may that humility be seen not in some kind of a false humility way that I have to cower or, confess my own sins, but it's a spirit, it's a tone. And it's important that we maintain that tone. Sometimes we carry a very holier than thou, contemptuous tone in our meetings, and away with all of that.
I am thinking one of the ways to kind of box yourself into this is to pretend to, again, go with the role play idea. What if you're being recorded? And what if the recording is going to be played back in a court of law, or if it's going to be played back in your next deacon's meeting, or your next Wednesday night Bible study? What would you say to this person if you knew the meeting was being recorded? And by the way, it may be. I mean, maybe there's a secret recording being made. What would you say to this person? If it's a young person, when I was a youth pastor, I used to think it this way. What would I say to this young person if their parents were sitting right here? Or if I was being recorded and the recording is going to be played back to their parents? What would I say to this person if it was going to be turned into a news article and put on the front page of the newspaper? And if my most combustible quote was the headline, how would I conduct myself? And I think that's going to force you to be measured, to keep a spirit of humility, and by the way, to have courage too. Like, I would say this to this person if others were sitting here, if it was recorded, if it was written, if it was used against me in court, I would still say these things. It's not that you don't still speak truth. It's that you are thinking through, how do you speak truth so that you're not reacting and saying things that you would regret saying. Or maybe you said the right thing, but you regret the way you said it. And I've got stacks and stacks of those regrets myself. But using
that's really good, Cary. I think an additional point to that is oftentimes in the conversation that you're having with somebody in counsel, when you're having this loving confrontation, inevitably other people's names are going to arise. And they're going to tell, well, he said, she said, they did. And if we're not careful, then we will begin to say things about other people to this person. And just understand, first of all, resist that. It's not that you never have to bring other people's names in, you do, but I think with the same rubric that you just suggested, and that is, I never want to talk about somebody to somebody that I wouldn't be willing to say to that person about whom I'm speaking, because that's a really, really great point that you bring out. Because if we're not careful, wow, this person will leave the conversation and said, yeah, but Pastor said this, and this about you. That's really, really good.
Yeah. It's not that you won't speak truth. It's okay. If you're going to bring up a name, if there is another person involved, what would you say about them if they were sitting there? Like, don't say anything you wouldn't say if they weren't sitting there, or the way you say it. And again, I'm not afraid to say something that's true, whether a person is sitting there or not. The question is, would I say it to them? And if I did say it to them, how would I say it? And then I'm going to be in a safe space. So adopt a spirit of humility. Number 17, you say, stay on topic and don't stack offenses.
Yeah, so sometimes what happens in a loving confrontation is we get fed up. You know, we that was the final straw. I'm going to talk to them about this. And if we're not careful, the loving confrontation is not so much, our being a good proactive leader, as it is the fact that we've been a poor leader and we're finally so emotionally fed up that we're going to deal with it right now. That's not fair for a couple reasons. First of all, if we truly cared about this person's character, and we've seen this happening as a pattern for days, months, weeks, whatever, and we've not dealt with it, that's an indictment on our unwillingness as a leader to confront ahead of time. So sometimes in those meetings, the best way to start the meeting is to say, listen, I want to ask your forgiveness about something. And they're going to look at you like, what? There's been a pattern of behavior in your life that I've detected. And as a leader, I should have addressed this, and I didn't. And that was to your detriment, and it's a poor reflection of my leadership. And so I'm going to ask that you forgive me for not doing that. So that sets the tone for being able to have the conversation. Now, here's the second reason why it's really important not to stack up offenses, because stacked up offenses have an aggregate weight. It's like the straw that is on the camel's back. And what's going to happen now is you stack up offenses is you're going to deal with them about this offense that happened last Tuesday, but it's going to have unnecessary weight because it's on top of the 10 other times they did the same thing. And it's not fair because they're looking at it like, okay, I was late. I was 10 minutes late. Okay, what's the big deal? Yeah, but you've been late for 5 months, and so now all of a sudden your emotion is so big because you have stacked up offenses that he just thought, whoa, Pastor's fine with me being 10 minutes late every day. It's not a big deal, and you've made it a big, insufficiently a big deal, unnecessarily, I should say, a big deal because you've stacked up those offenses.
Yeah. Perfect. Number 18, and this ends the second part of this where you're conducting the confrontation. Avoid generalities, and I'm going to add the word superlatives. Avoid generalities and superlatives. Go ahead and unpack that.
Yeah, actually superlatives is a better word. So exaggerations. Exaggerations are not evidence. We say things like, you always, or you never, and that's unfair. That is not generally true about a situation. That person, well, you're always so negative. Well, you never listen. That's not true. So be very respectful to speak to specifics. Yeah, be ready with examples rather than just stating your case by making, stereotypes are the weapons of a lazy mind. And we want to stereotype, because then we can dismiss a whole swaths of people. We can just create a label, put somebody underneath that label, and now we can just dismiss them en masse. And we see that happening in society. We see that happening, that's what causes such social divide, because we so quickly label, generalize, stereotype, and then we dismiss people.
Yeah. So this is 9 things that we've talked about conducting the confrontation. And I'm just trying to think of a big way to kind of put a bow on this part of the podcast. And when I'm having these confrontational, potentially combustible or difficult, and the word confrontation is got a little bit of hard edge to it. Sometimes, Kurt, these are just uncomfortable conversations. That's all. They're just difficult to have. And if I could box them up, I would say I want to come into it conveying love. Mm-hmm. I want to, in the middle, deal with the problem gently, patiently, conversationally, unemotionally. But then and perhaps optimistically, like, hey, this is a growth point. I know this is, I've made the same mistake, and I did this when I was your age, or, the humility in the middle. I want to deal with the problem gently and in a way that isn't shaming or crushing the person. But then coming out, I really want a forward look. I want to convey love again, and optimism and faith, and I believe in you, and I'm glad you're on this team, and this is a relatively small thing. I need you to course correct, but listen, I'm your biggest fan. Like, I want you to thrive. I want you to succeed. That to me is how I want these confrontations to go. I want to convey love coming in. I want to deal with the hard stuff, and then I want to convey love coming out, so that I want this person to leave my presence knowing they're not condemned.
Jay Adams, in his really famous book, Competent to Counsel, it's 40 years old. He said something very similar in that book, where he said, as a counselor, and that's what you're doing in these conversations, you're counseling, you're bringing the word to God to bear upon their situation. Mm-hmm. But in these situations, you want to be oriented toward a solution. And I love that. You're not going in to end with negativity. You're going in with a solution so that it's a more positive outcome for everybody when you leave that room.
Yeah. So that leads us naturally to the third part of this. And there's just 3 points here, so this will be brief. But part 1 was preparing the heart for the conversation. Part 2 was conducting the conversation. And now we're going to talk about post-conversation, cultivating reconciliation. So you give 3 thoughts. The first is get quickly into reclamation mode. I'll let you unpack it.
Yeah, so the conversation oftentimes is the doctor's appointment. And, hey, here's what we found on the ultrasound. This is bad news. I hate to be the bearer of that news, but it is true. We have to deal with it. And when people accept that news, and they see that scan, and now it's time to do the hard work. But the hard work is, now we're a team together. Here's a regimen of a dietary regimen. Here's a chemotherapy regimen. You went through all of this, Cary. Mm-hmm. It's the shock of that conversation and the bad news, and I didn't want to hear this, but I needed to hear this. Okay, but now I'm in reclamation mode. Now as a team, we leave this meeting. Where do we go from here? And you have to set that in, because if you're not careful, after that loving confrontation, there is an awkwardness that begins to pervade. and characterize the future relationship. So now it's kind of like we don't make eye contact in the hallway. They sit on the other side of the church. We don't deal with them the same way. We superimpose that negative conversation on all future fellowship. And you have to get in reclamation mode quickly. You've got to meet them on the shoreline and say, I love you. And that's what Jesus did. You get in that reclamation mode.
I find, Kurt, it's not hard for me to get there. For me, simply, it's like I don't have the emotional bandwidth to harbor this or to sulk in this or to sit in this. So when I deal with something like a staff disciplinary thing or something, I deal with it and I forget about it. Like I'm not thinking, the next time I see that person, I'm not thinking about it. It's not on my mind. To me, the difficult thing is they're still thinking about it.
Which makes a lot of sense though, Cary, because for you have a large staff, you have a lot of people, and that was one of many things. But for them, that's like you're their pastor. You have 2,000 church members, okay, but that you're their one pastor, and their one pastor had to talk to them. So it's much more difficult for them. That's why we have to be more proactive.
Yes, well, that's what I'm getting at. It's a bigger hammer to them than we intended it to be, and then we feel it to be. Like our presence and voice, it took me a long time to figure this out. When I stepped from being a youth pastor into the senior or assistant into the senior pastorate, suddenly just the title made my presence and voice hit harder than I intended to. Like I would get into a situation and somebody would be like, "Why are you involved in this?" And I'm like, "'Cause I love you guys and I care and I want to help." And they're like, "Yeah, but that's all the way to the top." Like, "Oh, that's the wrong way to look at it." It's just little old me trying to help love you. They feel it heavier than we know they feel it. And so really helping them get there, I think it can be hard work at times. So quickly get into reclamation mode. Number 20, really, don't keep score.
Yeah, I mean, that's scorekeeping is the activity of a legalist. Now I'm one up, I have something on you, 3 strikes you're out. That mentality, and that's never good for a relationship. Everyone always feels as if they're being examined and there's always a deficit, and we have to be careful not to do that. Marriages that operate on scorekeeping, a staff relationship that's based on scorekeeping is inevitably just going to be a frictional relationship.
This is making me think of, I think it's connected to this. I think scorekeeping shows up in a passive aggressive leader in subtle ways. And Kurt, you've experienced this. I've experienced this. There's a leadership style that won't have a personal hard conversation. It just keeps score, and then it takes those things that should be talked about privately, takes them to a public staff meeting, takes them to Sunday morning or Sunday night or Wednesday night message, weaves them into a public moment where if you know the situation, the pastor that won't talk to you privately about this is beating you publicly from the pulpit.
Yep.
Which I think creates an entire ecosystem of people sitting there going, "Who's he talking about? What's going on?" I think it infuses in the culture a culture of fear and unhealth and toxicity. But speak to that dynamic of leadership that won't go privately, but takes it subtly, passive aggressively public.
Yeah, and the big danger in that, and we've all done that, and we need to resist that. Stridently resist that. But the danger there too is that kind of a leader, then when you're forcing the moment of confrontation, then the uncomfortable conversation to be the follower. Like, hey, you said this in your message. Were you talking about? Oh no, I wasn't talking about you. And the strength of an innuendo is you can always back out of it. So you make all these innuendos, all these digs, but then it's like plausible deniability. Then you just back out of it. Like, oh no, I didn't mean that at all. But and it's gaslighting. That's like, no, you're the one that's reading into that.
Yeah, you're the problem, not me. That whole passive narcissistic, passive aggressive leadership is we need to be done with that entirely.
Yes.
Don't keep score.
Yes.
Okay. So after the meeting, get into reclamation mode. Don't keep score. And finally, number 21, remember.
And this is so important. Yeah.
What you give. You get what you give.
Yes. So, it comes back to that golden rule, doesn't it? That we treat others the way we would have them to treat us. And the point here is, I want to be gracious because I want grace. I want to be merciful because I want mercy. And, we want to get into this mode where we are people that do life together. We are in the same church. We are on the same staff. We are in the same marriage. We are in the same family. And we have to remember that very soon I will be on the other side of that desk. Very soon I will be the one that is the recipient of this loving confrontation. And I want to give what I want to get. And that's and Jesus brings that principle to the forefront over and over again, but probably never more poignantly than in what we call the Lord's Prayer. And we need to be living that spirit always.
Yeah, I think there's a senior leadership mentality and sort of a bravado that there's a kind of leadership or leadership type that likes to leverage authority / power, position lord over somebody, dominance. There's a personality type that likes to express dominance, put others in fear. And so that person will handle these confrontations very top down, very hurtfully, very fearfully. But if you reverse it and go, okay, how do I want to be handled? What do I want to be shown? If I'm the one being confronted, you're going to land on the side of mercy and patience and gentleness and grace, which is the spirit of Christ. And it is frankly what the gospel should shape and would shape in all of us if we look at how God has handled us and how he's handled our sin. So this brings us to a conclusion. Kurt, we've talked about the preparation before the conversation. We've talked about the actual conversation. And we talked about the follow-up of continuing and building and cultivating the relationship afterwards. Why don't you give our listeners a final word of encouragement on these difficult conversations, and then I'll wrap us up.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we grow in. I don't want people to feel after listening to these 2 episodes that this is a how-to lesson. There are probably elements of this I should have stated differently, and there are probably core components that you're thinking of that could be included in this outline for sure. But I like what you said last episode, Cary, and that is that the more we strive to practice this 2 Timothy chapter 2 model, the more it becomes intuitive. It's not a 1 through 21 thing, but it is just the way by which we deal. And we are regularly having these conversations in ways that are healthy.
Yeah. I think my word of encouragement would be to the leaders that listen to this and go, wow, I wish I'd known this years ago, or I wish I'd seen this modeled.
Me too.
The whole reason, yeah, exactly. The whole reason that I wanted to do Leading in the Gospel is I believe that we can unlearn bad leadership and we can learn new gospel-shaped leadership. I believe that's what the grace of God does in transforming us. So maybe you're sitting here and you came from a family that was just explosive and just fought it out. Maybe you came from a family that buried everything and never talked about anything. Maybe you've been under leadership that is the exact opposite of these practices, and you've never seen this model. Maybe you're looking in the mirror going, wow, I'm really bad at this, or I'm really ill-equipped with this. What I would tell you is make this a matter of prayer. Take these points we've talked about in these 2 episodes and ask God to shape it within you. And One of the reasons I enjoyed hearing this from Kurt is in my life a powerful influence, and I listen to this and I see it in him, and I'm like, wow, I want to be more of that. And as Kurt learned it, I can learn it, and I want to learn it. And so I would say wherever you are on the journey, don't disparage. Just get on the road of growth and say, God, this is who I want to be. I want to reflect the Spirit of Christ, and God's Spirit can take over and let you be transformed into the image of Christ in your leadership. And He will. Lastly, I'll say this. He'll take these hard conversations and grow amazing, wonderful things from them.
Amen.
When you go at these things with a spirit of reconciliation, good things come. And people know they were loved. They know you handled them gently, graciously, and it just builds all the right things in your staff or in your church culture. So, Kurt, thank you for taking time to share in these 2 episodes. And my friend, I just want to encourage you again to go to inthegospel.com, look at the books and resources available there, and then mark your calendar for Leading in the Gospel Refuel, September 28th to October 1st, 2026 at Disney's Grand Floridian. And if you need sponsorship, you need help or partial sponsorship, please reach out. Email me at pastor@ebcnewington.com. It's really important that you reserve your spot because we have a limited number of rooms. We cap the event on purpose to keep it small and relational and somewhat intimate in that way and personal. And so we would love for you to be a part, but we're sure that it will fill up. Well, thanks for joining us today. I pray that you will take these thoughts on difficult conversations and that you'll ask God to shape you in the heart of Christ in helping people to grow forward. So until next time, keep leading in the gospel.